Thank you very much for coming. I want to say, to begin, and thank you to the Humanities Festival for organizing this. I've been a tremendous admirer, as all of you are, of Lady Antonia Fraser since before she was even married to Harold. In 1992, Antonia Fraser and Harold Pinter had been married for 18 years at that point. They were going to have another 16 years of completely blissful wedded life, or 99.9% blissful after you read the book. And they decided to do something which I think was incredibly romantic at that 18-year point. That was, they decided to visit Kensal Green Cemetery and pick out their grave plots one day. This was something that seemed to be both a romantic and a, sort of looking forward kind of thing to do. But that is where Harold Pinter is interred, at the beautiful Kensal Green early 19th century cemetery, very much like Père Lachaise. And he is surrounded in that cemetery by writers and historians and playwrights and musicians. And if you go to the Kensal Green website, they even have a whole section on scandal. So it's sort of all covered right there. And his headstone says, quite simply, playwright, Nobel laureate, beloved husband of Antonia. If it was a bigger headstone, they could have also perhaps added poet, director, actor, screenwriter, activist, devoted cricket enthusiast. This is one of my favorite little personal tidbits of the book, this outing to Kensal Green. And, I think when I was just talking to Antonia backstage, you mentioned that you actually thought of continuing the book into that phase beyond, because Harold actually sort of dictated his own funeral.
We had a wonderful time. Can you hear me? Yeah. But we had a wonderful time. It sounds extraordinary, but I recommend it, going to pick out our graves, because you're taken round in a decommissioned London black cab, and the driver, therefore in the front, looking like someone out of Beckett, even before he spoke. And he put his head through the glass partition and said, "When did the deceased pass away?" And we said, "We are the deceased," and roared with happy laughter, because we were both in very good health. And then he took us from place to place, and didn't seem quite right, not quite right. And in order to sort of be polite, I explained, we want somewhere peaceful, you see, we're writers, you see, and as though we were going to be sort of scribbling away, But it was, he then, as Victoria has said, typed out, didn't dictate, he typed out what he wanted. And it is perfectly true, there could be other titles added to playwright, poet, screenwriter, campaigner, polemicist. But I was on firm ground because he had typed it. And the only thing I added was Nobel laureate, on the grounds, if you've got it, flaunt it.
Absolutely. Well, we had a reference to the diaries on which this book is based. And in fact, you started keeping those diaries back in 1968. You've been keeping them, writing them every morning, presumably, about this record of the day before. I thought it was really poignant. At about 5 months before Harold died in 2008, a journalist came to you and was talking to you about these diaries that lined your library, all very uniform and beautifully created, and said, do you ever go back and read them? And you said, no, I'm not going to bother. I'm paraphrasing, but you said, I'm still living my life. I'm not going to go back and read these. And yet, it was just 5 months later that literally it seemed almost, the day or two after Harold Pinter died, you went back to those diaries and decided, you began to write this in 26 days. It was finished, published 13 months after he died.
Well, it was actually a month after he died. He died on Christmas Eve, 2008, and it was exactly a month. I was having lunch with an old friend in a restaurant in South Kensington, and he was sort of trying to cheer me up, and he said, "Antonia, do you still keep diaries?" And at that moment, it just came in my mind like that this is what I was going to do. I mean, I think bereavement, extreme grief, sort of heightens every kind of reaction, not just grief. And I could hardly wait to get out of the restaurant. I said, thank you very much for lunch. It's been absolutely lovely. I must go home now. And I think my poor friend thought, you know, that I was very upset, but I was the opposite of upset. I was inspired. And I rushed home and I started getting out all the diaries, and I had not read them, reread them, I mean, since I'd written them. And I started at 6 o'clock next morning, and it took me to write the book, the first draft, which was more or less exactly the same as the last draft. It took me 10 weeks, which is not at all my usual state of progress. When I write history, I'm very slow and painstaking. And I felt a sort of inspiration.
But it's a very different book, as you point out, from something, for instance, I mean, there have been a number of grief books, My Husband Died books in the last decade, and of course, Joan Didion, the Year of Living, the Year of Magical Thinking is the one that comes to everybody's mind, but this is not a book of woe is me, look what's happened. You even state in the preface that this is really a love story. This is beginning and an end, the dawn and twilight more than high noon. So you must have decided at some point, this is going to be the trajectory of my book.
Yes, we have a genre of books, very popular, by the way. Our bestseller list is completely full of them, which are known as misery memoirs, which that does not include Joan Didion, who was a very fine writer, and I haven't read it only because when it came out and when Vanessa Redgrave did a performance of it, which I believe was wonderful, Harold was already very ill, and I felt that I couldn't bear to read it, you know, but that doesn't mean I won't read it one day. But the real misery memoirs, well, I think that sort of sums them up. And this is a happiness memoir. This was to celebrate the happiness we had, and I quote in the preface a saying that in Shakespeare's Richard II, Richard II asks a courtier, we must do something, get some men, get some arms, and he says, well, we haven't got any. And then he says, oh, call back yesterday, bid time return, that was what I was really doing. I don't mean that the book is without, it's obviously the poignant moments, the last bit, but essentially I wanted to write it as a love story, as you've said.
So let's get to the love part, because it really is a remarkable relationship, and I think that the beginning of it, when I was reading it, it was like reading the diary of a 16-year-old. I mean, and I know that's how you felt pretty much at the time, although you know you had both were at that point married 18 years. You had 6 children. He had 1 child. You were married to other people. And to me, when I went back and like looked at my notes from this, I see that on January 26th, 1975, this lady says in the book, I suppose I am in love with him. Now, she had met him 2 weeks earlier, just 2 weeks on January 8th, I think it was. And this really was what the French would call a coup de foudre.
Yes, so we celebrated January the 8th, our anniversary, and Harold, who was very romantic and always sending flowers and giving me presents on January the 8th. It's rather, I mean, now, obviously, I've had 2 January the 8ths, and luckily, a great friend of mine has his birthday on January the 8th, so he remembers January the 8th. And the first year after Harold died, he sent me flowers, which was very thoughtful, actually, you know, because he knew I must be, apart from anything, missing the flowers. So it was our magic date.
Well, look, would you read from that? There's a little diary entry here. And you might want to say something about when you went back to write the book, you actually have to write a fair number of transitions and explanations before and after each entry.
Well, I think they're not transitions in the sense that if you're constructing an essay, it's a transition. It's my commentary in 2009 on what I wrote in 1975, 1980, and all the rest of it. It's quite clear from the layout. A diary entry has always got a date above it, and then there's a gap, and then there's my commentary. And these were just what I felt when I read it. So it's sort of 2 levels, I would say. Shall I read 8th of January 1975?
Yes, please.
A very enjoyable dinner party at Rachel and Kevin's house in Addison Avenue. That was my sister, the novelist Rachel Billington, and Kevin Billington, who had directed that night Harold's play in a revival, The Birthday Party. A long and convivial table. I was slightly disappointed not to sit next to the playwright, who looked full of energy, with black curly hair and pointed ears like a satyr. Gradually the guests filtered away. My neighbours offered me a lift up the road. Wait a minute, I said. I must just say goodbye to Harold Pinter and tell him I enjoyed the play. I haven't said hello all evening. They waited at the door. I went over to where Harold was sitting. Wonderful play, marvellous acting, now I'm off. He looked at me with those amazing, extremely bright black eyes. Must you go, he said. I thought of home, my lift, taking the children to school the next morning, the exhausting past night and the sleeper from Scotland. Must write my projected biography of King Charles II. No, it's not absolutely essential, I said. About 2:30 in the morning, poor Rachel and Kevin were visibly exhausted, and we were the last guests. In the end, it was Harold who gave me a lift home in a white car with the driver. He never drove at night, having once been found weaving in Regent's Park. I offered him coffee. I actually gave him champagne. He stayed until 6 o'clock in the morning with extraordinary recklessness. But of course, the real recklessness was mine. We often used to speculate what would have happened if Harold had said, must you go? And I'd said, well, I'm awfully sorry, I've got to get up in the morning, take the children to school, write King Charles II, and off I'd gone. And Harold thought that I was his destiny, and therefore we would have met somewhere. And I thought it was like the Robert Frost poem, you know, The Road Not Taken. But luckily, we don't know.
You know, also luckily, you weren't living in the age of, you know, cell phones that could take photographs,
Yes.
and the internet, and I mean,
It's true, yeah.
it would have really sidetracked a lot of stuff. I mean, because, and even, I think your descriptions of the paparazzi, I mean, you were just hounded, the two of you, for whatever you could, however you could be hounded in that day and age by the paparazzi, you were. But you were having your, you know, romantic lunches and meeting up at these inns, and all it needed was one cell phone picture, you know, to hit the internet, and that would have been it.
You're absolutely right. I mean, Harold never lived in the cell phone age, as far as he was concerned. And cutting forward, when he kept going in and out of hospital again and again and again, I'd get a mobile and instruct him, and it didn't really get a cell phone, and it just didn't work, nor did he go on the internet, whereas I sometimes think I do little else. But that was to my advantage, because I mean, who wants a poem written out online? If you can have a poem in his wonderful big handwriting written on paper, just note, looking at your, Harold always used those legal pads. His papers are now in the British Library, but when I see a legal pad, it always gives me a very pleasant feeling of nostalgia.
One of the remarkable things, and you're giving us a sense, just in your conversation and in this book, of a Harold Pinter that most of us would never have been familiar with. The Harold Pinter most of us are familiar with from, you know, his myriad plays, this incredibly talented, brilliant, genius guy, but who we know as, you know, fairly anti-American foreign policy activist, as he actually added the word Pinteresque and Pinter-like to the dictionary, these master of long pauses, and kind of a tough guy. I mean, his best friend, Simon Gray, in this oft-quoted sentence, says, his voice was like a fist driving into you, no words used apart from obscenities and deep, ugly sounds. But the man he was with you, surrounding you with flowers when you first moved into your flat together, keeping every single shred of paper that you ever wrote a note to him on. He was an incredibly generous, romantic guy. And so I have to think, to an extent, in writing this, you were aware of creating a different Harold Pinter for the world to understand and know.
I wasn't aware of it at the time when I was writing at all, but I've been made aware of it ever since. The book's been out since January in England and since April in France so far. And I've been made aware of it because again and again and again, even people who thought they knew Harold, not well, of course, but thought they did, have been surprised. First of all, that Harold was a romantic, which is really true, plenty of evidence in the book. And secondly, that he was a jolly fellow. And I've just, before, I just signed a picture for a lady who was photographed with his portrait in our National Portrait Gallery. And I said to her that when it was done by a young artist. We have a BP, it's called a BP Portrait Award, and Harold sat for this young, he's now quite distinguished artist. And he looks rather glum. And at the time, I said, well, that's your East Timor face, because he was worrying about East Timor. But if you think about it, his plays are full of humour. It's, you know, they really are. So the man was humorous as well.
I think it was also just, you know, what we tend to read about is not the nice moments of somebody's life, but, you know, Harold told off, you know, some MP in a pub or something.
Yeah.
That makes the news.
Yes, I suppose so, but as it never happened to me, I wrote as I found.
Well, I think one of the things that have struck people in the book is that 4 months after this coup de foudre and you meet and, you know, your paths come together and it's obvious that you two are going to be together, you decide to tell your spouses. You were married to Hugh Fraser at the time, who was a decorated war hero. He was, I think, 16 years older than you. You'd had 6 children in 10 years. Oy. And Harold had a son and was married to an actress who was in a lot of his plays and movies, Vivian Merchant. And the reactions of these 2 spouses could not have been more different, and were both shocking in their own right. When you, when finally you tell Hugh, and he says, "Oh well, at least he's the genius. He's the greatest living playwright," and wants to meet the guy. So Harold comes over, and they talk about cricket and drink, and you go to bed.
No, I didn't go to bed. I just went to sleep, which is rather different. I went to sleep as they talked about cricket and Proust. I mean, I can only say that's what happened.
So was this? Were you as startled by the reaction of Hugh to this information?
Everything was so startling. After all, I'd never left a husband before, so I didn't know. Everything was so startling at that time. If I don't say I was startled, then I probably wasn't.
Well, Vivian Merchant, and I know that you do talk a bit about her in the book. And here are some subjects, by the way, that we're not going to talk about today. This is like the wish list that, in a perfect world, I could get her to talk about, but I know she's not going to talk about. So let me just get them out of the way right now. This is the cutting room floor list. There is Vivian Merchant and what her diary really says about her, not what you read about Vivian Merchant, who was Harold Pinter's wife. There was his son Daniel, who left the Pinter name behind, and this was in the book. We do find out that Harold's greatest failure, he felt, was his relationship with his son. And there are, you know, some scandals about really mainly you, but also Harold, about you guys had kind of an agreement about not bringing up people from the past in your relationship.
I think that's good. That's quite true. After all, we were having a terrific relationship with each other. And I think we felt that we'd come together in middle life. I was 42, Harold was 44, and we intended to spend the rest of our lives together, and we intended to, you know, make the best of them. So I don't think we ever reached, I think I say it's an unspoken agreement, but it was certainly true. And there had been people in both our past who we were perfectly friendly with, but we went forward.
Well, one of those people's actually, and that's not what we're going to talk about, but it sort of comes into the next reading, which I'd love for you to do. You do talk in the memoir a lot about recording what you identify as green shoots. Will you tell us, what is a green shoot to you?
Well, when I came to read the diaries through, in order to write this book, I noticed that whenever a green shoot, that is Harold thinking of writing something or getting an idea or jotting down a line, I always note it down in great detail. And I realized that apart from two lovers living together, I was also a biographer, my profession, living with a creative artist. So of course I was sort of exercising the biographer's art. I didn't think about it, but it became quickly apparent to me that I was very keen on doing this because I was very interested in Harold's work and admired it very much. So, so I did really what I've done for over 40 years. In one bit of it was being not Harold's biographer, but a biographer of our life together.
Well, would you read this part where you really sort of go into a little bit of what his process, his creative process was like, and this is a green shoot moment.
In 1999, Harold was toying with a play tentatively entitled Restaurant. He'd begun it late one Saturday night when we'd been unlucky in our very, very loud neighbours at the next door table in a famous West End restaurant. The play was not going well. 16th of August. Little Hugh Fraser, one of my grandchildren, is 3, and we are at Kingston Russell, rented house in Dorset. He came into the kitchen, Hugh, in Lucy's arms, fair and small and snuggly, and said in a very loud voice, "Look out, I'm the birthday boy." The next person to come in was Harold, who was none of these things, just extremely dejected. He said that he had chucked in Restaurant because the people in it were just too nasty. He didn't even let me read it. You'd hate it, just letting off some bile. But later that night, when we were feeling rather exhausted, what with the birthday breakfast and a lot of people over to lunch, the subject came up again. By now, the only adult guests left were Benji and Lucy, my son and daughter-in-law. For want of anything else to do, I suggested idly to Harold, "Why not read it to us?" So he did, and it was hysterically funny, if only for Harold's brilliant inaction of the so-called nasty people. Benji said, "You should have some criminals coming in and interrupting it all." This was uncanny because that had been Harold's original plan, but he couldn't get the ideology of it all. So he rushed away to his study at the end of the huge, rather empty house, which looked out to trees and the night sky. He worked very late. The next night he read us more. The people who interrupted were not terrorists, but a maitre d', such as Jeremy King at the Ivy, and a maitresse d', such as Carol at Lola's in Islington. 18th of August. Harold worked on the play, which is now called Anniversary. At 1 a.m. he came into our room in his robe, took off the robe, got into bed, got out of bed, put on the robe again. He said, "It's no good, it won't let me rest. I've got to go downstairs again." Apparently he worked till 5 a.m. and finished the draft. And that was the play which became Celebration. The title Anniversary, I think I actually pointed it out, was too like Birthday Party, and the play is not at all alike. The Celebration, which is a very, very funny play, but the central character becomes an extraordinary waiter, who sort of, Harold told me, it just came to him suddenly. There's a waiter, but he's a very odd waiter. And to give you an example, as a young couple are having a bit of a row at the restaurant, there are 3 couples and these sort of maitre d's. A young couple, because he caught him or heard about him and his secretary, and it's going quite badly, and they're making sort of snipey remarks to each other, and the waiter comes up and says, "Excuse me, may I make an interjection?" They're rather surprised, think he's going to tell them what the fish of the day is or something, and he says, "I couldn't help hearing you talking about T.S. Eliot," and it's the last thing they're talking about. So the man says, "Oh, you heard that, did you?" And he said, "Yes, my grandfather was a great friend of T.S. Eliot and Gary Cooper and Martha Horry," and he sort of carries on like this. It's very, very sort of surreal and funny.
Well, and you can see a version of this a lot of the Harold Pinter material is on YouTube and
Is Celebration on it?
Yes, and with Colin Firth and
That's
Stephen
right.
Ray. Oh, it's fantastic.
Colin Firth plays that youngish man, who's been caught with the secretary. He was brilliant.
Brilliant. It's funny because Colin Firth and Jeremy Irons seem to be used quite a bit, and they must have really had almost a very sympathetic relationship with Harold.
Yes, I mean, starting with Jeremy, they were casting a television film, which I don't know if you can see it. It's sometimes shown, called Languish Go Down.
Oh, sure.
Adaptation of an Irish novel by Aidan Hickins. And a friend of ours, actually Simon Gray's wife, said, you should go and see a young actor in a play called London Assurance. And he's really good. He's called Jeremy something or other. So we went, and there was the young Jeremy Irons, who I'd actually seen in Joseph and his many-coloured dream coat, you know, because you can't mistake him with those incredibly long legs, you know. And so he was in Languish Go Down, and frightfully good. He played a German student who betrays Judi Dench, the rotter, and the young Judy, wonderful. And then it came up, the question of casting the film of The French Lieutenant's Woman, which was to be directed by Karel Reiss, the great Czech director, and a screenplay by Harold. And when it came to casting, Harold was very keen that Jeremy should play the part of the man and the vital part of the man, and of course frightfully keen that Meryl Streep should play a vital part of the woman. And unfortunately, it seemed it wasn't going to work because Jeremy had just agreed to do Brideshead Revisited, where he plays the sort of narrator, the central figure. It's extraordinary for a young actor to have these two opportunities at the same time. But Jeremy has got a very strong character, and he just made them hold up Brideshead. They were all furious. Hold up Brideshead when he went away and filmed French Lieutenant's Woman. So that was the beginning of really long association, in which I saw it again the other day. It's terrific, I think.
French Lieutenant's Woman?
It? Yes.
Yeah, I just watched it again. It's wonderful. They're both so perfect in those roles. But you mentioned betrayal, and that was another one of these really interesting green shoot moments in the book that you capture and that give us a real insight into Harold Pinter's his life and his working, his process, because and you talked about how things started with him with an image or a phrase, and on vacation, he says, Antonia, write down something is happening. Yes. Because this is going to become the basis for something. And Betrayal, which 1978 was when it debuted, and you can only see bits and pieces of it, unfortunately, online, the movie that was made with Ben Kingsley and Jeremy Irons. But that started out as unsolicited manuscript, followed by Torcello, followed by White Wedding, and finally became Betrayal. So this was obviously the way he liked to work.
Yes, and all those boss shots of titles are all written down in his on his yellow pads in the British Library. It's so odd now to think, because Betrayal is such an important, the title is such an important part of the play. It's difficult to think that he ever experimented with Torcello, but anyhow, I mean, the answer is he got the right answer, because Betrayal, for those who don't know it, and it's maddening, it's not available. I promised Victoria I'm going to see what the situation is. It's to do with rights or something. Great movie. But it's about more than one betrayal, to put it mildly. I mean, there's the wife betraying her husband with his best friend. There's the best friend betraying his best friend with his wife. And the husband who gets to know about the affair and says nothing and just lets his best friend carry on in ignorance that he knows. So there are lots and lots of layers. This is Harold Pinter, after all, layers of betrayal.
And at the time, didn't people sort of assume that this was, they really thought that you were the woman?
They did. It never occurred to me anybody would think that a woman was me, because first of all, it's really as much about male friendship, non-homoerotic male friendship, such an important part of life. It was quite as much about that, so much so that there's a scene in Venice when the husband has discovered, the poor wife is trembling, and he said, I've always liked Jerry, that's the name of the lover. I really like him rather more than I like you. I should have had an affair with him myself. Now that is a sort of bitter, light remark. He's absolutely got her. You know, he's caught her due to a letter. You know, in Germany we went to see it once, and this remark wasn't taken as a sort of bitter barb. It was taken as an indication that actually the two men were sexually attracted to each other, which was the exact opposite of what Harold intended. We were sitting there, Hamburg, I think, from memory, sitting there, and this sort of scene took place, which the director, I mean, the last thing the director had meant to do was to go against the author's wishes, but he found it in the text. Interesting, really.
You know, going back to your statement about being a biographer and a historian and looking back in your diaries and, you know, picking and choosing this kind of moment to talk about, there must have been moments of great hesitation and editing on your part where you are still shaping somebody's life and our understanding of somebody's life.
Yes, of course. I mean, I can assure you, if I'd printed the whole of my diaries, far from finding out wonderful, salacious details, you'd be bored, rigid, and gone to sleep, rather like me, because most diaries, you know, I picked out, obviously, it's more fun to say, Harold's directing Lauren Bacall, we've become friends. That is interesting. To say we stayed at home for 3 nights so that I could watch Mad Men and Harold got rather fed up is not so interesting. So obviously, so obviously I had to make it book size, and I was very keen. It shouldn't be in a great, huge thing, you know. Obviously things are cut out, but I didn't shape it. Everything, except in one sense, by choosing. But I did not, everything I say is in the diary. As I explained, it's quite clear what's in the diary and what's not. Everything I say is in the diary is in the diary. And my historian's honour would never let me write something that's not true in the diary. I couldn't write, Prince Charles came to breakfast and said I looked ever lovelier or something. I just couldn't write that. What is the point? What's the point of keeping a diary if you don't write down the truth? Let alone could I have gone afterwards and made it a sort of work of original fiction. That just wouldn't have been me. And I think it's to do either being a historian or being a nice person. Take your choice.
Who was it that said there's absolutely no malice in you? Tom Stoppard, which I thought, well, that can't be true. But, and actually,
of course it's not true.
If it were true, there is a great, as I recall, there's a little moment where, I mean, they're like kind of zingers for various people. Like Princess Diana, who, when she's talking to, I forget who it was, maybe it was a prime minister.
Well, the whole point is it was the Prime Minister of Israel.
It was the Prime Minister of Israel. I couldn't remember it was a Prime Minister.
Shimon Peres, yes, on a visit.
That's right. And he said, you have to come to Israel. And she said, oh, yes, I really could use the sun.
Yes.
No.
But
actually, you know, if you'd left that out, it would have been, you know, less malicious. But I liked that remark a lot.
Yeah. Also, I thought it was a very sweet remark. It wasn't at all intended to be malicious. She was very, very eager to please. And there we were, I was being entertained. Shimon Peres was a historian, and so they had an unofficial lunch at Kensington Palace. I think the Queen was away or something, given by Prince Charles. And they asked historians. And she was so touchingly anxious to say and do the right thing. She wanted to, you know, she wanted to please. I thought it was very beguiling, actually. But I was very careful with myself, only to put things in that belonged to the subtitle, My Life with Harold Pinter. And with that particular item, which you've acutely spotted, I thought, how can I justify bringing that in? Because Harold wasn't there. And then I thought, well, of course, Prince Charles did quite genuinely at the end said, I'm so sorry we couldn't ask Harold, is he sitting at home eating scrambled eggs? So I felt that he was part of it, so I justified it.
It's kind of like writing off a vacation on your taxes, as long as
Yes.
you talk about business. Okay, no, I get it. And there's some great moments like that. We get to hear about Warren Beatty kind of making a passing. I mean, it is a who's who of just the life. It's such an enviable life that they had, regardless of the 3 days at home in bed watching Mad Men. I mean, what was going on after those 3 days was just fabulous. But I want to get back to that whole idea of a diary for a second, because without your diary...
oh, I couldn't have done it.
Well, you couldn't have done it. But beyond that, excuse me, doing a little bit more research, the diary form is something, I've got some here, thanks. The diary form is something which is actually very important in your family. And by your family, I am talking about the literary Longfords, as they're called, which the New York Times says, the Longfords and their relatives have written more books and filled more shelves than the Churchills and the Mitfords combined. And your mother actually said, it's like a virus. The kids just write, you know.
Well, the kids just wrote, but of course, in my childhood, first of all, my parents weren't called Longford. They inherited the title. My father did when I was 31. I was called Pakenham, and I lived in Oxford, where my father taught at the university. And my father and my mother were both Labour politicians. So that was my background. And I really chose literature and writing as something of mine, you know, as children often do, and I think in some ways should do, to strike out and have their own kind of life. And my mother, after giving up politics, quite late in life, inspirationally, began writing about 60 and wrote wonderful histories, Queen Victoria, Wellington. But she's an example of somebody having a late life, comparatively late life change of career, which, as I say, is inspiring, but in a different way.
Well, you were the oldest of 8 children that your folks had, and you had 6 kids of your own. And to get back to the diary for a second, as I understand it, you either required or heavily suggested that your children kept diaries of their own when you go on family holidays, and the rumor is that you offered to pay them £1 for every page that they completed and would read these diaries and grade them. True? Not true?
Yes, I used to say at the beginning of any fam hall, great cash prizes. And in fact, the editor of British Vogue, who's been there for about 15 years, Alexandra Schulman, is the best friend of my daughter Flora. And she always reminds me of how coming to stay with me in Scotland, I would announce great cash prizes. And then my children being children, tremendous arguments. If it was £1 a page, I can't believe it was so much, that would have been a lot of money. But if it was £1 a page, could you write short entries? Was it still £1? You know what children are like. And we all got into the sort of nitty-gritty of, what did £1 cover?
But it got them writing.
Yes, I believe in it. Flora told me that on her honeymoon, she went to Venice with her first husband, and she said, well, hang on a minute, I must write my diary. And Robert said, look, you don't have to write your diary now, you're married.
You can give it up. Harold did read your diaries occasionally, and you note when he actually would add something, put in a little, well, let me tell you this, or let me explain that, which I think was really charming. But you also mentioned that, I'm really sorry, that you read your mother's diaries after she died, and you've got, 40 years more diaries than she actually had.
Yes.
So my question is, who's going to read your diaries, and what's going to happen to them? Are you going to burn them the minute you get Dottie?
No, I don't think. I think one thing you have to face, that unless you do destroy something, it is liable to be printed, not immediately, and not necessarily, but it is liable. The thing you destroy, there's a destroying firm in Britain, which, for instance, a doctor would use for confidential files. It's called Cold Mountain. I'm always rather intrigued.
Cold Mountain?
Yes.
Like the book by Fraser?
Exactly. It was a rather wonderful name for destroying. But anyway, I'm at the moment, I have in my will, and I'm quite sure I'm not going to do another book out of my diaries, because I've got the central. Well, all I can say is, you may mind that music. Harold would have gone ape.
No, this is definitely a moment where I could see him standing up, like,
Yes.
which is actually one of the first times you heard Harold. You heard
Oh,
Harold
yes.
before you saw him.
Yeah, that's right. I was doing, when Mary Queen of Scots came out, they did this in front of big portraits, once again at the National Portrait Gallery. And there's a portrait of Mary Queen of Scots. So they took my book and made a narration with one part for Mary Queen of Scots, which was played by Vivian Merchant, only time I met her, and all the men read by an actor, and I was going to read the narration. Now, I'm not an actress, and I was extremely nervous, and then I made a fashion mistake. I wore a white trouser suit, which is what sort of the marvelous thing to wear then. My best friend in the audience said, it was a bit of a mistake, wasn't it? I said, why? It's very, very smart. She said, yes, but we can see your knees knocking together. But anyway, we were going to be recorded, going to be in an LP, those were the days. And this is 6 years before I actually met Harold, really, and 69, in fact. And in the middle, I was very pleased, in spite of being nervous, I was pleased that I'd be on an LP. And in the middle of it, there was a sort of eruption at the back, sort of noise. I could hear a man's voice. And on I went, knees knocking. And afterwards they said, I said, what was that noise? They said, well, it was Harold Pinter ticking off the attendant for making a noise. I said, well, I didn't hear the attendant. And then I was introduced to him. And by this time I heard there was going to be no LP. I was rather annoyed. And I said, I hear that was you. He said, yes, I do that kind of thing all the time. Afterwards, I thought, well, I can't say I wasn't warned. we seem to have shut them up. Anyway.
I hope so. I think we might have to make more noise than them, just to show them that we've got a better audience. We're going to take some questions in a minute, and we do have 2 handheld microphones, so you can get ready with your questions. But before that, I just want to ask one thing, and I know that going back to the beginning of this and the cemetery plot and where you will end up and where he is and the conversations you had together, you had converted to Catholicism like your parents. Harold was born Jewish but renounced it. He was really an atheist, and you had a very spiritual, devout.
Sometimes he said he was an atheist, sometimes, to be fair, an agnostic.
Oh, really?
Well, I used to argue that to be an atheist is just as arrogant a position as saying you absolutely know there's only one true religion. To say you know there's no God. It can be argued to be an arrogant position, whereas agnostic says, I have no idea, I don't think there is one, but I don't know.
Oh, that's better. And
that's an argument that I think I've often recorded in the diary, in which I always win. That is the point about a diary, by the way, for those who don't keep them. In the diary, you're always right.
Well, did you and he ever, this is kind of a cheesy question alert, sorry, but did you ever talk about the afterlife and, you think you're going to see him, he thinks forget it?
No, we didn't, no, not at all, absolutely not. That wasn't, I became a Catholic when I was 14, and I think like many Catholics of my generation, I came and went in my views about certain aspects of the church, and Harold, while being extremely proud of being 1,000,000% Jewish, abandoned the Jewish religion, he told me, after he made his bar mitzvah. So I asked the obvious question, well, then why did you make your bar mitzvah? He said, I wanted to get the presents. I'm not sure whether that was true, but that's what he said. And then it got more fanciful yet. We all had to do our favorite children's book for some charity in aid of Fresh Start, for helping unprivileged children. And I chose Our Island Story, and somebody chose Anne of Green Gables, that kind of thing. And Harold chose Ulysses by James Joyce. And what? He said, yes. I said, how on earth did you read Ulysses? His parents were admirable people, but not a book in the house, How on earth did you read it? And because I didn't actually, except Harold was very truthful, I didn't I couldn't add it all up. I said, well, how did you get a copy of Ulysses? He said, I used the money I got for my bar mitzvah.
That's wonderful.
I thought that was such a good story that I wasn't going to challenge it further.
I'm sure there are questions in the audience, much as I'd like to hog the next 10 minutes. So let's see, back there. I guess, yeah, we've got somebody scurrying down with a microphone to you.
I have very good news. I just watched Betrayal. You can all get it on Netflix. It's fabulous.
I
in
tried
conjunction
to get
with
it.
A wonderful class that I took on your husband's work.
Oh, I'm so pleased to hear that.
I literally just tried to get it on Netflix. So, and I put in Harold Pinter and I put in Betrayal. Okay, thank you. Great.
Thank you for telling me.
You don't have to send it to me.
Yeah.
Another question.
And if anyone would like to see the play version, there is an excellent production at Oak Park Festival Theater through November 13th. And it's wonderful.
Great.
I'm so sorry I shall miss it. I saw two of Harold's plays when I was very briefly in New York, The Collection and A Kind of Alaska, which run together, a very early play, The Collection, and A Kind of Alaska, a pretty late one. So I'm very happy. Just sorry I shan't see it.
Well, and didn't you say that this weekend is the Harold Pinter conference going on?
Yes, by a complete coincidence, the Harold Pinter Society, which is a very lively society, is having a conference even now, and I'm going to say hello to them later.
He got to see, before he died, he got to see the 30th anniversary of, which it was the birthday party, I think.
The 50th.
The 50th, I'm sorry, the 50th. The
Yes.
50th, and he got to see it go from, you know, wretched bomb to classic, something that nobody's ever really gotten to do.
He was a 27-year-old out-of-work actor with a wife and a young baby, and the play, at the time, it was just the greatest flop. It was taken off after 5 days, and he went to the matinee. It was at the Lyric Hammersmith. He went to the matinee and wanted to go in the dress circle, and the lady, the usher, said, I'm afraid we've closed it because there's just nobody there. And he said, well, I'm the author. And she said, oh, you poor dear. And 50 years later, the Lyric revived the birthday party with an actress. Is Sheila Hancock known here? No.
Sheila Hancock?
As Meg, and very good actors. So in 50 years, it was wonderful that this was May 2008, and to have gone from flop to an established classic, because everybody, studies it for exams and all the rest of it. Harold was very happy about it.
Another question. I'm following the microphone. Okay, he's coming.
Oh, just while you're getting that.
I just want to say I so enjoyed this talk, and I really enjoyed the book so much. And one of my questions is, in the book, you talk a lot about times, he would read you the play, and is it too short, is it too long? One of the plays you loved, but you said it needs something. He was angry, he went on a walk, and then he added another scene, which was very powerful. When it comes to your work, I was surprised that it was so long into your relationship that he read Mary, Queen of Scots. And I know when you would do what you called your optical research, he would come with you to Versailles as you were researching your wonderful books. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about the kind of insights or feedback he would give you on your writing.
Well, Harold was a wonderful natural editor. It always surprised people. I think it's not so surprising because if you think of his feel for language, it's not so surprising that he was terribly good at spotting if I'd used the same word, like you've used sanguine twice. It matters to me not to use the same word. And it was great to have this in-house editor. Also, he said, I know no history except that which I read in your books, which wasn't true. But it also meant that if I was writing about, shall we say, Charles II or Cromwell or indeed Marie Antoinette, he would ask a question, and if I answered, oh, well, everyone knows that, he'd say, well, I don't, I had to take it seriously.
Well, you know, the thing that you mentioned, that was a great question also, about going with you on these kind of walkarounds, whether you were sightseeing or doing research. He actually hated it. I mean, it's the one time that you would ever argue. And you said, you know, as early as 1976, when you went on your first trip to Paris, that he really didn't want to go walking around. And you say in your diary, it came as a surprise, a not entirely welcome one.
Actually, that's rather unfair. That's rather unfair. I mean, I think it did come as a surprise and not entirely welcome, but that was going to sort of French art galleries. I think there were other surprises, like when I said, all right, if you don't want to go to an art gallery, there's a pretty nice shop down the road it's called Christian Dior. Perhaps you'd like to go there.
Sounds like a good trade-off to me. Sorry, go.
I just wanted to say something about things on television and the birthday party. Harold played the part of Goldberg in the birthday party, you know, one of the two appalling people. He was brilliant. He grew a moustache for it, his own moustache. And actually, there's a picture in the book of him as Goldberg, looking pretty sinister. And at the bottom, you'll see he's written in his characteristic handwriting, Uncle Cuddles, love H. Well, the last thing Goldberg is Uncle Cuddles. And I believe, maybe, I don't know here, but I believe you can get that television, actually, also somewhere.
Great.
A relationship with Harold Pinter would be full.
Wait, we can't hear you for some reason. Try it again.
I imagine a relationship with Harold Pinter would be full of ominous silences. Were there any times in your relationship when you felt you strayed into a Pinter play?
Sorry, I couldn't get that.
He imagined your relationship to be full of ominous silences. And was there any time when you felt you'd strayed into a Pinter play?
No, Harold made his own rather good joke about people saying, you're not really very like your plays. He said, well, my plays are Pinteresque and I'm just Pinter. Which I think was pretty accurate.
Wonderful. Let me see. We have a question here. Do we have a microphone? Where'd that mic go? Can we pass it down? It's over there. I'm sorry. You have to wait. Sorry.
There was a distraction and I didn't hear the answer after Cold Mountain. And as a writer myself, I'm very curious of what papers you are keeping and what your plans are with all this personal information. What was the answer to that question?
I think I probably didn't give it. I got rerouted by thinking about
Was that a relief?
At the moment, I direct in my will my literary executor, who is one of my daughters who's a writer, I direct her to offer them to the British Library. We do things, I'm sure it was copied from here, which is sort of inheritance in lieu. Instead of paying tax, you give things, which means that if they want my papers to join Harold, they take the papers and they knock something off death duties. Do you have that system?
I don't
know
if we do.
It's used a lot with pictures, quite honestly. People will give a picture a great estate. There's an interview in the New York Times this morning with the Duchess of Devonshire, who's just written her autobiography, and reminds us that the Devonshire estate in 1950 paid 93% tax because no arrangements had been made, and they had to give very grand pictures because they didn't actually have money. And in the same way, you can do something like that if the British Library wants to. But I haven't at the moment. I think if you give or donate papers, it's no point saying, but nobody can publish them. Not that I think people would want to publish what's left of the diaries, because frankly, the best stuff is there. But I don't think you can sort of restrict it, really. But that's my present plan.
Well, and it would join all of Harold's material is at the British Library, and you just made a second donation to them of all of his medals and awards, including the Nobel Prize speech that he wrote in 2005, which I was amazed to read. Had something, and he was very, very ill. He couldn't even attend the ceremony, but you can hear this speech online too, and it's a very commanding speech. And he wrote something like 18 drafts of it, all fully annotated. On what? On these? On these yellow?
Yes, all on the yellow pad, yeah. No, he was at home when he got the Nobel Prize by a wonderful chance between hospital bouts. He was in hospital writing the speech, couldn't go to Stockholm. He didn't mind a bit. I minded, because he said I could buy a ball gown in order to take the eye of the King of Sweden. And I hadn't had a ball gown since I was 17, so I was terribly excited, bought myself this wonderful gown, which I've never had occasion to wear, alas. Anybody could think of a way in which I could wear my ball gown. I have actually sort of made it 3/4 length now.
Maybe at the Jaipur Literary Festival.
Oh
when
yes,
you go.
what a good idea. The trouble is, as a matter of fact, it's made in India, so it might look rather odd.
They'd love it. Are you kidding? It's great.
Good. Passion tip.
Okay, let's see if we can take one more question. One more question. I know, we're dying to ask a question. And this will be our last one, unfortunately. There's somebody else trying to get in here, I think.
I was wondering, because I've read about Harold's humor and, you know, the lovely story of your love. But he was so tough and so able to convey this sort of hostile guy, you know, like in The Homecoming, the father, and these characters in The Birthday Party. You know, what was his relationship like with his father? Was his father tough? I know I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, but
I mean,
where did he get this knowledge of these really, you know, hostile, angry, tough men?
well, the Homecoming, which is extremely tough, actually shocking play. If I ever go to it and I'm not shocked by it, I think that wasn't a good production, because it is totally shocking. It was nothing like Harold at all. I mean, for one thing, Harold was an only child, you know, of adoring parents, and the Homecoming is all about, again, sort of relationships between men, the brothers, the jealousies of brothers. And I used to think, how does he know so much about family life when he didn't actually have it, you know? And then one of the brothers brings back a wife that's sort of alien, you know, and so forth and so on. So his own home life was nothing, either with me or as a child, was nothing like the Homecoming. And I think with creative artists, you know, you have to allow a huge amount for the imagination. It's always a mistake to try to pin it too much, although it's human to try to do so. It's a mistake to try and pin it down too much to facts. That's what I do. I should get things right. But Harold didn't like it when people claimed his plays. I wasn't with him when the Homecoming came out. But it was reported in the Jewish Chronicle to be a Jewish family. And Harold didn't like that at all and said, it is not a Jewish family, it's not a Protestant family, it's just a family that I've created.
Well, I'd just like to add to that he was born with something, because as I recall, his mother, who had been planning to have a larger family, and when you asked, you know, why didn't you ever have any kids, and she basically said, after Harold, we were done.
That's absolutely true. Before I knew his parents, I said to Harold, why didn't you have any brothers and sisters? And he said, oh, because I was such a pain. They didn't want any more, ha, 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 ha. And when I first met Frances Pinter, who was a wonderful, charming woman, the first thing she said is, you've got 6 children, haven't you? I said, yes. She said, we only had one. Harold was so difficult, we never wanted another.
This has been absolutely wonderful. I'm sorry we have to stop, but thank you, Antonia Fraser.